Our guest today has already inspired me to think differently about how I see my team. I've always wanted my team to be happy, but after researching our guest today, she inspired me to see that it's more important that they feel fulfilled because happiness isn't really something you achieve. Cindy Jordan is the CEO and founder of Pyx Health, and she knows this all too well, as their technology is a mental health app that helps forge deep human connections to make the world less lonely. And she's also figured out how to lead her team with these deep connections. Cindy Jordan, welcome to How I Turned the Corner.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. I'm so happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit more about let me say it this way. When we were researching you, we asked you the question, what do you think it takes for your employees to be happy? And you had such a unique answer. Do you mind sharing that with our guests?
Yeah, I mean, I read an article, turned into a book, and it's a whole way of thinking. It was another entrepreneur that basically just said happiness is elusive, right? And it's finite. And if somebody were in a constant state of happiness, then they wouldn't even appreciate that they're there. So asking people to strive for happiness is almost inevitably setting them up for failure. And I know what that sounds like, but you have to think about it this way. We're not asking them to strive for the converse. We're not asking them to strive to be sad or, disenfranchised. What we're asking them for is contentment. Because with contentment will come happiness. You'll have this, what I like to think of as like almost like an EKG. Like contentment is the baseline and happiness is the spikes. And that is in a work environment in particular, nirvana.
Mm-hmm.
Even outside of work environments. I mean, name a marriage that has been, that is just always happy, then that's probably not a legitimate marriage, because life is just not that. And so yeah, when we came up with our beliefs and our behaviors, which we're going to talk about, which is our culture, none of our behaviors were like, be happy, because we knew that would feel like as if someone actually couldn't achieve that, in a constant state.
Uh-huh. So you're a serial entrepreneur. This is not your first business.
Right.
Tell what was different for you, and what did you learn in the journey of running a business that created this? Because I think it's very profound. I mean, even I'm going to put into the show notes, if you don't mind, a screenshot of your behaviors and beliefs and outcomes, because I think it's really a beautiful way to look at what we typically call like your values, your mission, vision, values. But this is more in depth than that. But what brought this on for you? How did you get to this place?
Well, so my first company was a great company. We were in healthcare. We made money for hospitals. We sold it relatively quickly, but it wasn't mission driven. Like there was nothing in the center of it. Like I always say that Pyx has a heartbeat. That company didn't have a heartbeat. It was a good company and we created a good work environment, but it wasn't structured. It wasn't thoughtful. It wasn't built for scale. It wasn't, our culture was just organic. It was because we all liked each other and took care of each other and treated each other like family. And when I sold, there was 20 of us, but imagine if there were 200 of us or 400 or 600, like that wouldn't have worked, because you can't treat everybody like family when you have 600. We always say relationships are easy and most fulfilling when they're an inch wide and a mile deep. But and this is for companies and for social media and for family and everything, when your relationships go a mile wide and only an inch deep, like social media, like large companies, then it's a lot harder to find fulfillment. And so we knew that we were going to have to create a structure that would scale, frankly, outside of me. So we took, then I started Pyx in 2017. It really came from a place of passion. My stepdaughter at the time was suffering from bipolar, and she had a really terrible year. She went in and out of the emergency room, and she ended up in an inpatient facility, and there was actually some addiction thrown in there. And as an entrepreneur like you, I'm a fixer. And so the first thing you want to do with your kids in particular is sit them down and say, how can I fix this? So I asked her that exact question, and I wanted to know what came first. Like, how can we get ahead of this horrible year that you just had? And she talked about being lonely. And I did not understand that. And like most parents, I think at that point wouldn't. Like, you're not lonely. You have us, you have a roommate, you have all these things. Like, well, I don't understand this loneliness. And after researching it, and the reason why I started Pyx is loneliness is really about a person's perception that they're alone, not physically being alone. And after having that perception for a period of time, it actually will rewire the brain. So no one understands my plight. No one can help me. The medicine my doctor told me to take it will never work. I am in this by myself, and it's a very, very dark place to be. And that's why they say, like, now there's research showing that loneliness is more deadly than alcohol or obesity. And it's because of that mindset. And that's actually where Riley was, my stepdaughter. And that's in the end, what I believe killed her. She ended up passing away shortly after we started the company. And so back to culture, why is this company so special? Because it does have a heartbeat. At the center of that is Riley. Now, that said, as we grow and we're scaling and we're getting fairly big, like, how will everyone understand Riley or know Riley or have said that they had an experience? That's not possible. So what we had to do is take that gem, the beauty of what created this amazing place, and make it something tangible. And that's when we came up with beliefs, behaviors, and objectives. So I took some money from a private equity firm a few years ago, and they had a guy on staff, and his name is Brian Kite, and he taught culture to the NFL. Now, I know that seems crazy. So like an NFL guy coming and, dealing with a mental health company, but what he basically did is said, when you're dealing with athletes in particular, they like steps to success. Like, if this, then this, if this, then this. So rather than mission, vision, which tend to be obscure, kind of fluffy words on a wall that are really hard to manage we actually use our beliefs and our behaviors in particular. Behaviors are in every single person's
Performance.
Performance reviews. Sorry. Yeah. So I'll give you an example. One of our behaviors is to listen to understand. Well, how many times, and the belief associated with that is that human connection comes first. The outcome we want from that is happier and healthier people. Okay. But how many meetings have you been in where someone's actually not listening to understand?
Mm-hmm. Often. Yeah. Often, especially with clients who are kind of defending their culture or defending their situation. Yeah. Whenever you're in a state where you're kind of backed into a corner, you're not listening to understand at all.
Yeah.
So conflict, especially.
Yeah. And we gave our employees tools around this too, right? Like, so let's just stick with listen to understand. The tool that we gave all the employees is called BCD: blame, complain, defend. If the person that you're engaging with, or the people like you're talking that you just mentioned, are blaming, complaining, or defending, then they're not actually doing that behavior. So this is how we sort of quantify. And I'll tell you, we've had very high performers here who don't exhibit the behaviors, and we will let them go, because performance is easier to build, find, obtain than aligned beliefs.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. I totally agree with that. And I mean, what we've said in the past is, and again, I think we're going to shift this just based on just you, even with this interview and the research, but the values or the behaviors are what you want to hire and fire and manage and train and govern and promote against, because they become your guardrails. Makes it possible for tough decisions to actually be easy, because you've already got this system in your mind of what you value and what behaviors are coming from that. But I like the way you go a little bit deeper with that, and then especially giving more tools to really identify and kind of uncover that. Because I think, like, for example, one of our values at Turning the Corner is no jerks.
Yeah.
But which we love that. And I will say, I think I stumble on it as a leader sometimes too, around it. I mean, like, what really defines a jerk?
Right.
And
what's the behavior associated with being a jerk?
Yeah. And I have more an intuition around that than a real actual methodology to it. And so I just like this idea of going deeper around, like, what are you really looking for?
Yeah. Yeah. I totally, I mean, again, I mean, this wasn't my brainchild, but what I think that we have been able to do is to take something that someone helped us form and really, really live it. So a couple things, like before we hire anyone, before the first interview with HR, which is the one that the gatekeeping interview, we send them a link to our culture. So there's videos, it talks about the behaviors and the beliefs and that kind of thing. And if at that first interview at HR, no matter what your resume is, and I don't care if you're applying to be the CFO or in the call center, if you haven't watched it and you can't speak to it, then you don't move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
if you are not willing, when you're trying to win a job, like actually, dig into the culture, then you are certainly not going to do it when you're here.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing we do is like a kind of one of our beliefs is more than a job, and a behavior associated with that. And usually every belief has 3 behaviors. You don't do more than that, because otherwise then it gets like
Confusing.
crowded.
Mm-hmm.
But do what you say. That's measurable. People will send an email and say, I will do this and I will get it to you by next Tuesday, or I will take a look at that and get back to you by tomorrow. And if there's a chronic missing, if there's someone on your team who is never doing what they say, then they are not living up to our belief of more than a job.
Mm-hmm. So what do you do in that instance? And here's what I want to talk about with it is, I think sometimes that in that particular situation, do what you say you're going to do, and then not doing it. That's kind of a learned behavior. I think it's a very coachable opportunity.
Yep.
Now, not every behavior I think is learned, but
Right.
in that particular instance, what do you do?
Well, to your point, if it's like the first time, we would just have a conversation with them and say, hey, just want to remind you of our BBOs. They're at the heart of what makes this company work. And the one specifically I'd like to talk to you about is more than a job. And there's one of the behaviors in there is do what you say. And I noticed a pattern over the last few weeks where you've said that you'll produce things on a certain deadline and you haven't. And so I just want to bring this to your attention. And that would be, the supervisor would do that as the first. The second course, if it keeps happening, is to performance them.
Mm-hmm.
And not be afraid of that.
Right.
What I always say to people, and this also came out of our culture, is this idea of E plus R equals O, right? You can only control one thing. There's an event. Everything that happens every single day in our work, in our workplaces, is our events. There are a series of little events and some big ones. So the only thing you can control is your response. So the E plus R, which is your response, equals the outcome. And so we will talk a lot about people who might be put under pressure, and they'll be like, well, it's not my fault. I tried that. Nope.
Defend.
Nope. Right. A, you're BCDing. And secondly, the one thing you can control is your response. That's the one thing you have 100% control over. And so, by using these things, it's very tangible. People are not caught off guard when they've been either performanced or let go for not actually living the behaviors.
Mm-hmm. I think that's amazing, because I do think a lot of people will hang on to people who are not aligning with the behaviors that are expected because they are too valuable, or they have the right relationships, or all these excuses that can come up. When I really get in there and dig into it, they're costing the company thousands and thousands of dollars. That's not worth it. And the toxicity that's spread and all of that. But I think what you're giving people with this idea is a little bit more of a framework. And I think that's really helpful. So now, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we actually have a culture council, and they do things like workshops periodically. So we just did one yesterday. We have a full-time therapist on staff, because in addition to our technology, we have a whole call center of people that we call Andy, and that stands for Authentic, Nurturing, Dependable, Your Friend. And they're licensed peer support or behavioral health technicians, and they actually do a lot of the interacting with our members. And it can be very hard at times when people are lonely and they don't have food and they can't get to the doctor, or they just lost someone. It can really weigh on you. So we have a full-time therapist for these folks. Anyway, that therapist did a training yesterday, and it was all about one of our behaviors of believe in yourself and others. And so she talked about the specific part about believing in yourself. Like, how do you do that? How do you actually take credit and believe, because a lot of folks, particularly I'd say younger folks, women, I'm one of them, like they tend to have like this imposter syndrome, like, they don't really believe they can do it. Or if they do it, then, they don't take the credit that's associated with it. So what we do around our behaviors is offer just like continuing education. If you were a nurse, we do that for our culture.
Yeah, that's great. Continuing education for culture. I like that.
That's right. That's right.
So are you all in Tucson, or where is your whole culture there, or are you spread around the country?
No, we're all over the country. We
Okay.
have to be, given what we do. Like a lot of times, because we serve a huge youth population around loneliness. And a lot of times if you're serving youth, particularly foster care youth, the folks have to live in state. So
Okay.
we've got people everywhere.
Okay. So now how do you pull this culture then through this remote environment and somewhat hybrid environment?
I mean, we do it from our leaders, right? Like it's impossible now at this point for it to be just about me. And we do a staff meeting once a month and I speak for maybe 20 minutes, or 15 at most. So again, this is back to my first company where it was easy for it to revolve around like sort of the family atmosphere. It isn't anymore. So we have a culture council, and their job is to give leaders tools to actually live the culture. So I'll give you a great example. In June is Loneliness Awareness Week. It's coming up. It's a big week for us, obviously. We have a lot going on, but it's not just what we're doing outside in the world. It's what we're doing internally. So the Culture Council got together and created a whole bunch of things that leaders could do for their folks, including at some point during the Loneliness Week, as people are going above and beyond, which is in one of our behaviors, we'll send them like a DoorDash. So there's things like this of gratitude, appreciation, like being honest. One of our behaviors is under More Than a Job is to bring your love to work. And love in the workplace are not synonymous. People don't know how to do that. And so the Culture Council will do things like, hey, thank you for bringing your love to work. You're so valued here. We're so grateful for you. And so they kind of pay attention to a lot of the stuff that goes on virtually on Teams. And there are team channels dedicated to these things, because when you're virtual, this is sort of how we get together. Once a year, we do try to bring almost everybody in, all salaried employees for sure. But if there are folks who are hourly, that gets a little harder. But we bring everybody in, and the whole working is around culture. The other thing that we're doing this year, because now it's been 6 years since we've been in business, is we're doing a kind of a repurpose. It's not that the purpose of Pyx is going to change around solving loneliness, but we are going to double down on our purpose again as an organization.
That's excellent. So, because I hear that all the time too, and I'm sure you probably hear this from your peers of, you can't have culture when it's a remote team. And I'm like, I'm going to challenge that to the end of the earth here, because I've run my business in a hybrid model since I opened it in 2011, before it was needed.
Yep.
We were hybrid, so to speak. And we have a great culture. And so I'm like, I think if I can do it, like anybody can do it, because I'm not special in any of this. But it sounds like
clearly, I wouldn't say you aren't special. I'd say you were thinking about these things long before most people were. And you were dedicated to the remote environment. It is 100% possible to do it. You just have to take what you would do in person and find ways to make that, scalable across the country and across time zones and that kind of thing. And certainly, with the way technology is now. So at the end of Loneliness Week, for our staff meeting, we won't do a staff meeting. We hired a person that comes in and it's like hiring a game show host. And so we'll celebrate, right? We'll celebrate all the effort that we put in, and there'll be prizes. And I think we're playing like Family Feud, like we'll divide people into teams and the whole thing gets run, so just doing little things like that. Every now and then here in Tucson, I'll shut down the office at 2:00 on Friday and take everyone to a movie. And then people that don't live here, I'll send them a gift card to whatever theater is near them.
Yeah. That's great. I love
there's
that.
ways to do it.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's just different. We have to
Yep.
adapt. And I think that's the big message I think that's going into this next decade for employment and employers is a couple of things. One is we have to treat people as a whole person. They're not
Yep.
just a worker who's going to get a
Yep.
paycheck in exchange for their time. That is gone. I think the second thing too is that a policy-based people agenda is no longer going to work because one policy may not work for another person. We have to stay flexible as possible with all of this. And so I think those are two really, really important things that leaders need to embrace going into the future. And
Yeah,
many
when we gave everybody every other Friday off, and we measured productivity deliberately leading up to it before the announcement, and then measured it after, and the productivity shot up 37%. But here's the deal. I mean, I had some of my leaders that fought me on it because, again, we run a call center. And so it's really hard, and I'm like, listen, figure it out. You'll see that you will get better, more fulfilled. Fulfillment is where we're going. It doesn't mean that they're always happy, but it does mean that they're fulfilled and they have time, like to, have a personal life, et cetera. And so every other Friday was one of the best decisions we've made.
When did you guys start doing that?
It was almost a year ago now.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. So post-pandemic, which is great.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So then when you think about, I mean, you've got a diverse population of people as well. And so because just diverse, even just an hourly versus salary.
Yeah,
like
we have
across the
exempt
country.
and non-exempt, which is a big deal.
Right. Yep. A really big deal.
Yeah.
Do you notice a difference in the cultures between those two groups?
So that's kind of a little bit of the danger, right? Like each department, because they you don't want the dev, like we employ, developers, folks who write code. You don't want their culture being different than the culture of the call center. However, I do think you can let teams have personalities.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I'll find that's different. The personality of the call center teams is really different than the personality of the dev guys. They're built differently as humans, right? They come from a different place in life in the way that they want to walk the world, but they don't have to have different cultures. You can have different personalities, but if you start to see the culture move off away from what is the company's culture, then that's bad leadership.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's where your BBOs come into play to really help guide that.
Right. And remember, we train leaders really to recognize this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Leaders have their, we always say, when you look at the box, like there's individual performers, there's leaders, and then there's leaders of leaders. And for for folks that, and not everybody, a lot of people like being individual performers, right? And that's great. Then that's where they'll live, and that, and you can work with it. But for folks that want to be on a career track to be a leader of leader, this is one of the things that makes a difference. Can you execute on it? Are you paying attention to it? Are you catching it when it's like veering off course?
Mm-hmm. I find that when we work with a lot of growing small businesses who, just don't have any of this infrastructure or structure in place.
Yeah.
And what I also have noticed is that layer of leaders is like the thing that carries culture forward or lets it drop. That is the most important layer to work with. Is that been what you've experienced? Yeah.
And in fact, when we did the culture exercise, which was a period of weeks over months, I'd say it took us about 2.5 months. It started with the leaders of leaders. Then once we had a kind of a framework, we didn't have the words around our BBOs, but we had a framework. How do we want to do it? We knew what the BBOs were. We knew that we were going to do these things. Then we brought in the leaders as well to get buy-in. So what I think and frankly, the folks who ran us through this exercise, my private equity partners, Rally Day, they discouraged me from doing that. And I'm like, look, either I have to go out and sell it or let them come in and buy it. Right. And so after we had a framework, we pulled together the bigger group and you could say, well, was that unruly? It really wasn't. I mean, there was dissent. There was disagreement, but by the time we left that room after those 2 days, we were 100% aligned.
Mm-hmm. And it's not bad disagreement. It's bringing an opinion to the table. That's not bad disagreement at all.
I don't think so in the least.
Yeah. Yeah. We've had that experience too. We revisit the values, which we're going to change now or clear. But we revisit those every year because I'm like, well, every time we grow and we even have new people on, there's a possibility or change the way we're delivering to customers. There's a possibility we might want to shift some of that. And it's good to revisit it. We haven't changed them at all in 12 years of being in business, which have still find to be kind of remarkable. But I think it's good to just have those opinions come to the table because there's might be a better idea out there too.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I agree. The other thing that we do for folks, and we do it once a year, is we do a workshop to let them come up with their own personal BBOs. Mm-hmm. And those are the ones that change dramatically. Mm-hmm. Like I look at the ones that I did 2 years ago in 21 and the ones that I most recently just did. I actually have them like taped on my whiteboard over here, and they're wildly different.
Why do you think that is?
Because we as people, unlike companies that get inertia and tend to move slower, even as startups, right? You're moving a group of people in one direction. And so therefore you can't be as nimble as an individual. But my life has changed in the last 2 years. My son's life has changed in the last 2 years. My outlook on life has changed. Does it mean it went from A to Z? No. But did it go from A to maybe D or E? Yeah, it did. And so it's important for folks that are going to be convicted on your values or our BBOs or whatever companies are calling them, that they have their own. Mm-hmm. Because it's only if we are solid as individuals that we can be a contributor to the group.
Mm-hmm. So true.
So we do those individual ones every year. It's fun.
That is really neat. I love that. And I also love that you have a psychologist on staff. Another prediction that we have is that and we're starting to see it happen too, is that one function of the culture team or the HR team or whatever you want to call it is going to be a coach, where it's somebody you can come to have discussions around your situation at work, who can help navigate that with you. Yep. Almost like an ombudsman, right? And so I love that you're doing that. That's great.
Yeah, and the ombudsman, like that is something that came out of nonprofits, right? Like it was good governance to have an ombudsman on your board of a nonprofit, so that there was an outlet for everyone. First nonprofit I ever worked at, they gave me a staff chart and there was someone there and she was the ombudswoman. And I was like, what does that mean? Because remember, my first job out of college, I was actually a police officer in DC, which is where I went to college. And I did not love the profession. As an entrepreneur, I didn't thrive in a paramilitary organization. But what I learned is that I didn't have a voice there, because it is paramilitary, because there is no culture in a police department. You know what I mean? It was something that when I crossed over to the chasm of working at nonprofits, which is where I went next, like it was shocking to me how if you took care of someone as individuals, what they would give you, what they would do, how they would be dedicated toward the, the collective goal, the mission.
Mm-hmm.